Good evening, everybody. I'm Heather Beasley, Associate Artistic Director at Boulder Ensemble Theater Company, and I would like to welcome you to our post-show conversation this evening. We're thrilled you can join us for the second part of our opening night activities, and very much hope you enjoyed the film. We have a wonderful panel of participants and community members and co-creators here tonight with us to answer some questions for us and also have a conversation with you. So I'm going to ask each of them to introduce themselves, and I am going to start off with Bobby.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Bobby Lefebvre. I call myself a writer, performer, and cultural worker. I currently serve as Colorado's Poet Laureate, and I got the opportunity to play myself in this production, which is always cool. I'm also an actor, but it's kind of cool when you get to be in something like this and just be yourself. So welcome. I'm going to pass it off to Rabbi Joe.
I'm Rabbi Joe Black. I'm the Senior Rabbi at Temple Emmanuel in Denver, Colorado. It was weird to see myself portrayed with my exact words on screen, which was fun. I'm also a singer-songwriter, and I wrote and recorded the closing song. And I'll pass it off to Lindy.
Oh, that's all right, Rabbi Joe. Hello, everyone. My name is Lindy Rosario, a she, her pronouns. I'm a dramaturg and literary artist, and I was part of the script editing team, and I did some of the interviews early on in the process. I'm very happy to be here, and I'll pass it to Elijah.
Hi, everyone. My name is Elijah Gray, and I'm an actress and educator and activist. Was also a part of the co-creative team for this project. So it was very, very exciting. And I also got to portray myself, but my favorite thing of all was including a lot of the youth voices that you saw who are some of my students. And I'll pass it to Yuka.
Hi, I'm Yuka. I am a violinist, a funeral violinist. I live in Denver, Colorado. I portrayed myself, but then also someone else was playing me, which is kind of interesting to see that. You got me spot on. Yeah, I'm just happy to be a part of the project. I played some traditional funeral dirges commissioned by the Guild of Funerary Violinists. So kind of honoring Elijah McClain through that way.
So I want to thank you all for taking the time to join us tonight. And because each of you has a connection to one or more art forms in some way, the first question I wanted to ask you are as we're starting to get back to a world where we can gather, where we can perform, where we can be together, what are you most excited for?
I can start. I'm excited for live music and dancing and being in the same room as other people, and in the just being in that space and not having to. And I'm also ready for the social awkwardness to go away. We're still in these social places, whether you're getting coffee and people just don't know how to act. We don't know how to stand around each other. So getting back to the idea of proximity and physical touch with people, I think is going to be really, really important. So I see live music and dancing and as a performer, also being in the presence of people and being able to share my word and art is super important, and I'm looking forward to that.
I totally echo that, and I would just add that I'm really looking forward to that shared spontaneous experience of being an audience member and laughing at the same joke or gasping at the same spontaneous moment on stage. Those are sort of the things you don't really get as a Zoom audience member, but that you really get when you're all live together. So I'm looking forward to that.
Absolutely. We went to Planet Bluegrass the other night, last Thursday, I think, and we saw a live concert, and it was outdoors and it was a small number of people, but it felt so weird and so awesome at the same time. So from the perspective of the arts, from the perspective of a leader of a congregation, I'm looking forward to being able to pray together in sacred space and commune with others in a sense of real community. Not that what we haven't been doing online has worked, it has, but being able to see people and having them see us and celebrate and joys and sorrows together really is key. So I'm looking forward to that.
Artistically, I'd say, yeah, everything everyone else said of just kind of being in space with people. I think as an educator as well, I still teach often every day virtually, which is still a lot of fun. I'm very introverted, even though I'm like an actor and outgoing, and people are like, but aren't you just always on? And I'm like, no, I like being at home. But I do miss seeing kids in person, and there's nothing like doing ensemble activities, you know, with kids in space. So I'm really excited for that. And then personally, outside of our huge sports fans, so I'm ready to see my Raiders play the Broncos and be gambling table games and all that good stuff.
Yeah, for me, I think I'm really looking forward to just like helping people with grief work and funerals and helping them grieve and process grief. So I don't know, this project has kind of been helping me just see what that will look like. So I am definitely looking forward to doing the hospice work and old folks' homes and sort of helping people transition through music.
So, myself and Alasia and Lindy, as co creators, had the opportunity to see the film in the same room for the first time this weekend. And it was actually the first time the team had been in a room together since we started the project, even though we were masked and socially distanced at our own corners. And I think one of the things I'm most curious to hear about from people who were interviewed as well as appeared or performed is what was a moment of tonight's film that really spoke to you?
I'll start. To me, the countdown for George Floyd. I served as a rabbi in Minneapolis for 9 years, and we were there last summer in July, and we went to that sacred space and that sacred ground. And now watching it on television, it's 2 blocks from where my kids were born. You know, that to me is, and those, watching that over and over again as we obsess on this trial, realizing what the impact of that on this nation, on not just people of color, but of course people of color, but also those who were witness, and the trauma that it evoked at that moment, and then the trauma that spread out among our nation, and the realization that the work that we need to do to be anti-racist, just that, seeing that clock tick down just really kicked me in the stomach.
For me, I really enjoyed the moments of hearing from people I didn't agree with, hearing perspectives that triggered me into this sort of new idea of rage, and just understanding, you know, good documentary work includes multiple perspectives. And I found myself in that conflict, right? We know that story, conflict is the fire of story, right? And so I found myself really intrigued by the moments where I was being pushed in a way that was making me unhappy, hearing perspectives from folks that maybe I didn't agree with. And I think those moments of tension for me were the most interesting throughout the project. And I appreciated that. And it also made me that much stronger in my convictions and the things that I know that I believe. So in all of the moments, you know, there were these beautiful moments, of course, but I think that overall, that conflict is what I took away most, and that was most interesting to me.
I have a question for our creators. For Alasia and Lindy, if you had if you had it in terms of, sorry, what was it like for the two of you to go from interviewing people to then taking what we'd heard and turning it into a screenplay? What was that process of transformation like for you?
For me, it was really interesting to find all the patterns when you talk to so many different kinds of people and recognize that there are these overarching themes that just come out of everyone's sentiments and attitudes all growing around the same time or geography or specific historical event. I think that that's something that was really striking to me, was to in a way put them in relationship to each other and create conversations that were not there, that were just, separate people having ideas and attitudes towards toward certain themes and events, and then making sure that these people were maybe put in juxtaposition or in contrast or in conflicts, which was really interesting because these are real people. And I often do try and create a balance when I'm working on pieces like this to make sure that all voices are equally represented and that it doesn't really skew towards one or the other, but create sort of this variety of perspectives.
Yeah, I would say definitely envisioning the conversations that are taking place that didn't really take place was amazing. And it was also incredibly hard. I don't think people can completely grasp like what it takes to you interview someone, right? Then we have their transcript, and we're making sure everything is right, word for word. So the interview might have been an hour and a half. You're spending another hour and a half to just make sure it's word perfect. And Zoom didn't know what COVID was at the time, so I don't even know the many ways that was spelled. But then to take these words and like Lindy was saying, like then make them conversations, especially if it's multiple people in a scene having a conversation, and nothing being like haphazardly thrown in either. Everything very intentional. All of us feeling a deep sense of gratitude and respect for the people we interviewed. So making sure things weren't out of context. Yeah, it was an incredibly amazing task, but also very difficult in the best way though. Like we had so many great perspectives. So it was a lot of fun.
Chiming in on that note, I would just say I think we could have made this a weekly series just from the material that we got for weeks and weeks. That there was just so much richness that we had so many threads to pull on. There were so many roads we could have gone down. And people were really generous and honest and wonderful and warm with us and giving. They were really willing to answer questions, and they came into conversations just really with the courage of their convictions, which made it really enjoyable as we continued working with their language afterward to develop it into a script that it seemed like we could hang on to bits of their personalities and really bring them forward into the story, so that perhaps our viewers would get to know them as well as I feel like we got to know them sitting down with the transcripts. We have a question in the chat, which is, as this project now is streaming, what is our call to action now? What is the call to action that this project leaves us with?
Well, I'll start with it. I think there's several layers to that question. The first one is, what have we learned? And I've learned a tremendous amount this past year about the use of technology, about what it means to create virtual community, and the importance of retaining that. But how do we build on that, and how do we take that and use it in a way that's not gimmicky? And you're making, I mean, my job is creating community as a rabbi, one of my jobs, I guess. And so finding ways to do that in a way that's meaningful, and not just because we have the technology. How do we use that? And then all of the pain that we've experienced, both in terms of dealing with the illness, the emotional pain, the racial tension, the societal explosion of differences that we've seen. How do we make peace with that? I mean, every community that is not just sort of, that is not unilateral, that has a different perspectives. I mean, Bobby, I really appreciate the fact that you said you heard people you didn't agree with. How do we take, everything has become magnified because we have so much time to think about it and cogitate on it. How do we take the divisions that we're dealing with and use them A, to heal, and B, to create a more dynamic society where we listen to one another, but we also respect the real pain that's out there. That to me is one of the major tasks that I see ahead of me.
For me, it's very similar to what Rabbi Joe was saying. Was the it's like the collective grief. We have to grieve in order to love and to sort of love deeper. So I feel like, I guess we can all share the grief. You know, we can all kind of get into that and sort of get used to having uncomfortable conversations, uncomfortable challenges that we have to face. You know, as a society, as a you know, the culture, as different cultures. You know, so I feel like for me, this project has really pushed me forward into deeper grief work, doing deeper grief with myself and others, and helping facilitate the deeper understanding of what love actually is. I think that's the same, for me, it's the same flip side of love, right? It's grief. So, yeah.
Yeah, I'd say for me, the call to action always sort of lies in the deep listening and the fact that so much of what came out of this year had to do with the fact that we were all paying attention to the same thing at the same time, because we were all in the same place and told to stay put. And so I really feel like this idea of collective action as an active response to deep listening is something that I really hope we can build momentum on and take with us moving forward as a way to have active attention, active collective attention to the world around us and what is happening, so that we don't lose sight of how effective we can be collectively.
I think part of it for me too is like I was having these super existential like conversations in my head about truth and what that means, right? Like I was looking back at like philosophy in my head about like what is the moral obligation that we have to all of these things, right? And how is that relative to the way that our perceptions color what we believe to be true? And so for me, it was like, how do we get to a place that is somewhere in the middle through all this disagreement and in these ways that we exist together? You know, when I think about all of this idea of love and we need more of that, yeah, absolutely. And I also believe that there's some people that just aren't going to come around, and I don't know how much time or energy I want to spend with those people. You know, James Baldwin talked about the idea that we can disagree, right? And I'm paraphrasing, but if our disagreement, and we can disagree and still love each other, right? But if your disagreement is rooted in my oppression and the lack of you seeing me not as human, then there's no conversation there, right? And so trying to get past some of those things, knowing that we're always going to have these points in society that are in contention, and how do we humanize that experience together and still show up for each other, but also learn to either disconnect or know where to focus your energy, because I'm not interested anymore in trying to get people to come to my side when I know they're not capable of it or willing or wanting. And so how do I, I'm speak for me, how do I cut them out of what I'm doing and focus on the people that I want to build with, that will look into a world that is more radically imagined and different and not rooted in perpetuating the same systems and things that have, you know, marginalized so many of us.
One of the things that I've learned, and Alicia, I know you want to talk, so I'll be quick, but one of the things that I've learned and focused on during this whole process is lining up values, and what are the values that are in conflict with each other, you know, whether it's the value of preserving life and the value of creating community, and the tension between those values. By the way, I really resonated with what you said there, because if your values are antithetical to mine, I don't know how I can even begin. I can hear you, I can radically disagree with you, and I don't want to engage with you, but sometimes I have to. So the process of determining which values rise to the top, and they're stacked, and they are, and that's the process that I've been going through all year, and I see it as reopening becomes more and more of a reality, they shift. So I resonate with that very clearly. Lacey, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to step on you.
Oh, you're fine. No, I think I was just going to pretty much say everything you all have said in 2 words, and that would be stay woke. I think that means we have one of the questions we ask all of our interviewees is this a reckoning or an awakening? A lot of people, especially people of color, said it's both. But I think just in this idea of staying woke, staying present, if that's staying woke to, like Bobby said, the people that you need to disconnect from, there you go. You see them, right? They see you depart. I think now that we're in this, awakening or reckoning, of, especially because of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery and just all the victims of police brutality, and even what we're seeing still happening in Georgia, like stay woke and present and alert to the things that are happening when our lives go back to normal. Stay present and woke in the feelings that you felt in COVID and the sadness and the loss and the things that you maybe took for granted prior to a pandemic. And just not losing sight of all those things that are really, really important and that need to move not only yourself forward as an individual, but communities, a collective, and not taking a back seat to that. So staying woke means staying present, staying conscious, not in a state of consciousness where it's like, oh yes, I'm aware that I'm awake and yes, my light is on, really being present and conscious of like, and I'm sitting on this couch that feels like XYZ. So 2 words, stay woke.
I think pulling on that idea of sadness and loss and also deep listening, one of the moments that really resonates with me is the importance of listening to and recognizing harm before we shift into repair, before we shift into, there is no new normal. We are not snapping back to a thing. Things are changed. Things are different. People have changed. People are different. And I think as a country, and I would actually love to hear more about this from other people on the panel, we're not really good at grief. We're not very good at grieving. We don't know how to do it. We don't know how to be present in our sadness and our loss. A lot of times we use our sadness and our loss and our feeling of being harmed as a shield, so that we feel like we don't build relationships or don't maintain relationships in times where maybe we need connection more than anything. And I think I heard something from several of our interviewees that it touched on that deep need somehow for connection, but also at a time when we're very separated, maybe the most we've ever been.
In the Jewish community this past weekend, concurrent with Easter, although there's no connection, but we finished Passover, and at the end of Passover we have a service called Yizkor, and Yizkor is called remembering, and we remember those who have died, and it's basically a time in the midst of our joy, we sit and we cry, and we tell the stories of, and we feel the loss of those who were taken from us. We had Passover that we just ended, and sitting around our Seder tables, there were those who weren't there, who chairs that were empty, whether as a result of COVID or maybe it happened, 10, 20, 30 years ago. But staying in touch with that loss and grieving what was and understanding what we've learned and what we've lost it's the only way you can move ahead to the future. If you bury it, whether it's a loss of trust, whether it's a loss of the myth of, the American exceptionalism or the American dream, whether it's the loss of believing that there is no racism. This past year has brought some of the ugliest and some of the most beautiful elements of American society to the surface. So you have to acknowledge that, otherwise we can't grow, or we'll be in denial, and we'll regress, and we'll do more horrible things to each other.
I recently did a talk with the Biennial of the Americas around the importance of social memory monuments and how we memorialize things. And I think that this is what I've been kind of, going off of what Rabbi Joe's saying around how do we collectively mourn? What does that look like? How do we give ourselves space to sit in that sadness? How do we reframe the idea of what it means to be strong, right? And root that in this ability to be vulnerable, this ability to not know where we're headed. And that's, you know, I was looking back at the questions for this evening and thinking about, you know, if I was to ask the cast a question, I asked a question on March 21st last year as things were really starting to pop off. I asked on my Instagram feed in a very, you know, non-scientific way through an Instagram poll. I said, what's on the other end of this? And I gave two options: radical transformation or more of the same. And, you know, I look back at that percentage and about 60% of people thought that we were in line for radical change. The rest were like more of the same. And so I think that that's something that I'm asking myself and all of us now, as we get through this, knowing that there is no new normal, that there is no snapping back, that there is no return. How do we remain forward facing? And as we burrow through this large mountain together, when we get to somewhere new, if there is somewhere new, what does that look like? What does a world that we long for but have yet to, you know, experience look for? And what happens when we get there? And what does it look like? What does it sound like? How do we treat each other? How do we show up? What exists in that new world that does not exist now that's for the better? What do we lose? I really enjoyed the idea of what have we lost, right? We've all lost something. So contextualizing that, what has that loss brought to us? How have we navigated that? And what will we put in its place? What will we fill that void with? Us who remain the living, you know, I think we have an obligation almost to fill in those blanks.
That's a question I'd share with the rest of the panelists as well. One of the things we did to put the show together was that we had a short list of universal questions that we asked everyone that we interviewed, whether it was describe your community in 5 words or less, or was this moment an awakening or a reckoning? What does America need now? I'd be interested to know, either from those of us who conducted the interviews, if you had a question you wish we could have asked everybody now, or from the people who were interviewed, if there's a question, if you had the opportunity to ask the cast, what is the question you'd like answered? What is the question you'd like to hear a variety of voices chiming in to respond to at this moment?
It's a great question. I think I'm not exactly sure. Because there's been a lot of positives for me as well as with all the negative. I've gotten to spend time with my wife, you know, that I haven't had in 32 years of marriage. We just celebrated our anniversary, and we've been together every single day, which has been both a challenge and an incredible gift. So in you know, Alicia, you talked about being an extroverted introvert. I think you didn't say that exactly, but I'm putting that on you, and I feel the same way. You know, the ability to retreat in, and I'm afraid of going back. So the question I would ask is, how can we accept the change that everyone has gone through over these past 13, 14 months and use it to build a better world, a better community, a better self? You know, do you start with your, however small or macro or you want to go? How do we take this gift and this curse that's been thrust upon us and use it to make the world a better place?
I love that. One of the questions, I don't know if all the interviewers ended up asking it, but we kind of threw it out there, and I did end up asking all my interviewees, was, what are you doing for self-care? I think, so what the question would be right now is, how are you feeling right now? You know, I think that's a question that is also, I want to keep using the phrase taken for granted, but I don't think we check in with people genuinely and not knowing, a lot of us have suffered from grief and trauma and all the things in the year. And I think maybe let's blame capitalism, but there's this idea of like, we just keep moving. And so we are also, as people, guilty of not allowing people space to grieve and space to process, because there's another email, there's another Zoom call. And if you're an introvert like me, again, I'm really space conscious. I'm sage in my house all the time. So that's a lot of different energy coming into your house. Or at work, you usually can leave that and then come into your sacred space. And so, yeah, I'm very interested in checking in with the heart and soul and spirit, and how are you feeling, and whatever way that means to someone.
Yeah, I'd be interested to hear now, a year later, like what are you happy to leave behind? Like what are the things that you can just let burn in the dumpster fire of 2020 and just move on feeling great about for being free of any of those things? I have a couple on a short list, but I'd be interested to go back and really see like what people sort of shed from their lives happily in this past year.
I think if I had the opportunity to ask a question now, it would be one of two things. I think partly because I'm occasionally the Pollyanna in the room, that I would have also liked to ask, what have you gained? Like, what have you learned about yourself this year during this time for introspection? What have you gained, or what have you taken on that you never made time for before? It ties in with self-care, I think, very much, but it's also that journey of self-discovery that I think a lot of people have gone through this year. But I even more than that, if I only get one question, I think the question I'd want to ask is, do you think change starts with yourself, or do you think change starts with changing the systems we have? Because I think people have different entry points to the work that lies in front of us. And I think that understanding more about where people want to begin might come back to that sense of a call to action. What is the call to action we want to leave people with? That if people are reflecting on what are their ways into the transformations that lie ahead, I think that would be a great question I'd want to leave people thinking about. And speaking of leaving questions for people to think about, I just want to thank all of our panelists for taking the time to join us tonight. It was so wonderful to hear your voices again and your perspectives. And I thank you for all of your work on the project as the company representative, in addition to being a co-creator at the moment. And I want to thank everybody who's watching for joining us tonight. Thank you all so much. And we look forward to seeing you in the non-Zoom world as soon as we can all make that possible. Thank you very much. And I hope you have a wonderful night.